Hello everyone, I am Deepjoy Katwal and I teach in the Department of English at Salesian College, Sonada. I welcome you all to Radio Salation's introductory radio lecture on Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels. So slowly he is able to tell them about England, about the Constitution of England, the political system, the social system, everything. And at the same time, he is also observing the political, the social and economic system and the food habits of the horses or the houyhnhnms. And he comes to the conclusion that the horses, the houyhnhnms, are far more better than the human beings. So what does he decide? He decides not to return to England. However, the horses also find him curious because he is so much like the yahoos, the beasts in their own island, only because he is wearing clothes and only because he eats in a certain way using spoon and forks, and only because he talks in a particular language, he seems different. But the horse who has given Gulliver a place to stay, he has seen him naked and he can see the similarity between him and the yahoos. So finally they decide that Gulliver is just like a yahoo. In fact, he is even more dangerous than yahoo because he has been able to use his brain or rational thoughts to subjugate or to torture other beings or other creatures in the human world. And what if he is able to teach these things to the yahoos? And there's so much similarities between yahoos and the human society that Gulliver talks about, right? So for instance, yahoos also like collecting shiny objects, and Gulliver has described to them that how humans love money and how they love to collect money and gold and precious metals. So finally they decide that Gulliver cannot stay in the island and that he has to go back. So even though he does not want to go back to England, he has no other choice but to go back. But his experience in the land of the horses or the land of the houyhnhnms forever changes Gulliver. So even when he goes back to England, he cannot talk to his fellow human being. He cannot even talk to his own family members, and he spends most of his time in the stable talking to the horses. So as you can see, the entire book, from the beginning to its topical references to events in England, in book 1, for example, he's talking about the petty nature of the English king and that of the French king and how they are constantly fighting. For example, the Lilliputs are constantly fighting with each other, they are enslaving each other, and so from there he moves on to how people could behave in a different way. For example, the giants, they have everything, right? They are huge, but they do not fight. And even when Gulliver tries to give them the formula of making gunpowder, they do not want that because they have come to realize that war is not good for anyone. Battle is not good for anyone. So Gulliver, essentially Swift through Gulliver is telling us or telling people of his time that whatever they were doing in the name of progress, in the name of science, in the name of rationality, they were not doing it in a good way. They were not doing a good job. In fact, in the name of religion, progress, science, They were demeaning essential goodness of human nature. So that is the reason why Swift is relevant even to this day. Just as Shakespeare, why do we read Shakespeare today? Essentially because Shakespeare went beyond the topical everyday events of his time and universalized the human experience. And Swift also does the same thing through Gulliver's Travels. Because human nature has not changed, it remains the same. So essentially, what people were during his own time, people are same even today. There may not be kings now in most of the countries, but there are politicians. So there's always this struggle between people who have power and people who are subjected to that power. And it is essential for us to reflect on the way we live, on the way our society functions, and on the way we conduct ourselves in this world. So not just today, if someone were to read Gulliver's Travels, even after thousand years, I'm sure they will find enough reason to find some meaning and to associate so many things in the novel. Now let's talk about why satire is an effective weapon of criticism and resistance. So Jonathan Swift wrote a lot of satires precisely because it was the flavor of the time. The 18th century society was seen as having decayed from the earlier golden period of the pre-Restoration and the Renaissance time, and it was thought to have degraded, to have been more commercialized. So as a result, satire became an effective weapon to attack what the writers and poets saw as moral and spiritual degradation of the time. And Swift also firmly believed in that idea. But even today, if you have noticed, satire is the most effective way of criticizing an ideology, a person, or a society in general. Why? It is mainly because, as you can imagine, it is the less risky form of criticism, right? Because it is couched in humor. So first you are making people laugh at the absurdity of the comparison, at the absurdity of the exaggeration. So slightly you are exposing the follies, the frailties, or the stupidity of the people, but in an indirect way. So people are prone to read satire. So instead of just writing a direct criticism where people will be offended, they might not even read it, people are more likely to read satires. And it is through laughter that you are supposed to make them think, right? So satire is a way of making people think while making them laugh. So it is a very effective medium of criticism. And also in places like authoritative regime, where you cannot say anything against the people in the power, it becomes imperative, it becomes compulsory, it becomes necessary for the writers to write about the events, the excess, the domination, the subjugation in some ways, and satire is their first choice. right? So in the form of satire, they criticize. So every time Gulliver is stupid enough or naive enough not to see the obvious absurdities of human race or human systems, we as readers see them clearly, and we are in a position to see the connection and think for ourselves while laughing at the absurdity or the stupidity of Gulliver, or the naivety or the simpleness of Gulliver, things which are so obvious to the readers. But it has its downside also. Satire has its downside as well. For instance, this is what Swift had to say about satire. He wrote in one of the letters that, and I quote here, "Satire is a sort of glass wherein beholders do generally discover everybody's face but their own, which is the chief reason for the kind reception it meets with in the world, and that so very few are offended with it." So satire makes us see the weaknesses, frailties, stupidities of other people, but they prevent from seeing ourselves. So we have to be careful to be self-reflective, and unlike most readers of satire, we should not forget that it hides so many things about our own selves. So we should not be easy on ourselves, and we should be equally critical of our own behaviors and our own societies and the things that we do. With that, I hope I have been able to shed some light onto Gulliver's travels, and I hope all of you will now go and read the book and try to find yourselves whether the things that we have discussed match up to the actual book or not.